and welcome to another installment of Straight Talk with Egypt McKee. I am your host, Egypt McKee. Listen, I always amaze myself when I talk to people about the term back in the day. You can always find out about how old people are just by the things that they actually remember as being back in the day. Like a time when there was no social media, when you remember not being enslaved to a cell phone or a smartphone, looking over every like or every status post that other people were posting around the world. How about a time when you had to use a typewriter to actually produce a term paper? Or even prior to that, when there were no remote controls, you had to get up and walk across the room to actually change the channel on a television set. Well, back in the day has a big reflection upon how we look at life today. I hope the things that we talk about today, you'll come to a place where you can actually get plugged in and sort of settle in a little bit and figure out just where you are and how culture has really changed. You know, over the years, I don't think it's any surprise. We are in a world of moral, ethical, leadership decay at every level. I mean, look around us. The changes that we're experiencing are not so much predicated on how things have changed or things have progressed over time, but it's people and opinions and worldviews. All of these clash into this salad bowl of stuff going on, and everybody wants a piece of the pie. And at the end of the day, I think we're all asking one simple question. Am I going to be okay? You know, am I going to be okay is a real big question, because oftentimes I talk to a lot of parents and a lot of young married couples and a lot of those who are courting and dating and getting in a position where they think they want to get married. And, you know, when you start to actually share with them the reality, the grit and the brute behind the relationship of why things work, it's because it takes so much hard work. And not hard work like you think of applying yourself and sticking with it and, you know, staying the course. All these kinds of things. I'm talking about the resolve that comes from deep within. The one where you make a commitment, where your word truly is your bond. Now, quite frankly, we can look around and I'll tell you what, there's not a whole lot where your word is really predicated upon anything other than just a word, kind of a passing leaf in the wind. Because if you sign a contract, there seems to be a void or some sort of out clause, or just whether the fact you even want to apply it or even you want to adhere to it or not. But you know, when I think about where children are, where adolescents are, where young adults are, where families are, so much has changed over the years. I even hear this negative connotation often used about, let's not go back to the archaic days of the 1950s or the prehistoric days of the 1960s. And I think to myself, was life back then all that bad? Now, I wasn't born in the 50s, but I was born in the 60s, and I can tell you, as someone in their mid-40s right now, I remember life being very different. I don't remember it being an archaic, brutal regime, as many today want to get me to believe. I remember a time when I had to take responsibility for hard work and mowing grass with a manual lawnmower and saying, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, thank you, please, you're welcome. All of these things were topped off by one important, self-reflective, responsible response. I'm sorry. When I've done something wrong, I actually admit that I'm the one who has done something wrong, but I'm sorry never stopped at just admitting a wrongdoing. I actually fulfilled the second part of that, and that was to actually go make it right. Where it is possible, I'm sorry is fulfilled in going to make it right. You know, today, if you kind of compare those two different dynamics and paradigms in life, you'll find a lot about how people actually apologize now. Apologies aren't really done in person anymore. We actually go out on Twitter and we have a fake apology. That's no apology. That's just a statement. Who cares what you write on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or any internet posting? The reality is taking responsibility and the relationship that you have with reality is actually following through with that. Now, I realize some of you are parents out there, and some of you are even young adults in your 20s and early 30s and maybe even in college, and you're thinking, yeah, but that all sounds good in theory, but how does that apply to me? The reality is when you look around, every opportunity you have every single day, you've got opportunities either to A, demonstrate a new kind of behavior which will help you live somewhat back in the day, or you can actually teach or mentor someone else to take ownership for their responsibilities and for the things that they're responsible for so that they can actually invest in the lives of others around them. You know, oftentimes I get to talk to all kinds of interesting people. I call them movers and shakers, and these are life-impacting kinds of people. And these kind of people, really, you might not have heard of before, but you'll want to listen up very closely to my first guest. I've got coming up here, Danny Fish McCook. I want to say Danny, or shall I say Fish, welcome to the show.
Hey man, thanks for having me here.
Well, I tell you what, it's a pleasure having you. And I want to first begin with this question of the name Fish. Where in the world did that come from? I mean, I've heard of all kinds of call signs, of logos, you know, Ghostwriter, everyone's got their cool name to go along, but Fish, man, give us the history on that one.
Well, pretty much, when I started out music when I was around 10, a buddy of mine came up to me and he was like, hey man, let's start a band. And I was like, okay, well, I don't play an instrument, but sure. And so he was like, well, you can play the bass. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just learn this, I guess. And bass is spelled like bass, which is kind of a fish. And somehow they made that connection. And so it just stuck. And everyone started calling me Fish for some reason. And so I just kind of kept
So
it.
it has nothing to do with, working down on the Fisherman's Wharf or anything like that. We just, I just wanted to clarify that for our
Yeah, I
viewing
mean, I don't
audience.
have gills or anything, but...
Well, that's awesome, man. You know what? One of the things that drew me to you is the genre of music. A lot of times you can look at an artist and somehow you can kind of tell what kind of music they play and what their vibe is all about. But I don't think we ask the right questions that much anymore today. We don't really ask people, what's the purpose of your music? What really got you there? So what is your message? Tell us about that.
I mean, the idea behind all my music is pretty much just to inspire people to create. I mean, that's what I do, basically. Just to make something your own, and to be original, and not to, take inspiration from people, but not copy them. Make something that's your own and express the uniqueness that you have inside you, I guess.
Well, that's an amazing thing because, one of the things I think about is how many people will do anything they can for the sake of fame and notoriety for just a moment. I mean, we've actually made television shows out of them. You look at the American Idols, which is probably one of the most epic amateur musician type shows, and people go on there and they're absolutely atrocious. I mean, they actually sound like wildebeest. I mean, it's crazy, and then those who are bad are told that they're good, and then they're told they're bad later, and then they get all irate and angry. What kind of life lessons have you learned not having projected yourself into that kind of a venue and applied yourself and said, hey, if I'm going to take this seriously, I need to do this for me. I need to do this for the right reasons. I need to do this for those in whom are going to actually listen to my music. How did you come to that place?
I guess for me, it wasn't about the fame. It wasn't about the, whole getting my name out there, playing shows or whatever. It was more about, okay, I love music. How can I do this for a living? And how can I create and also be able to support myself and eventually support a family? And I mean, that's what I want to keep in mind.
And I always find that pretty interesting because, at the genesis of any launch project, there's that noble gesture, that noble dream. I want to do this for more than just me. I want to do this for others, my family unit, but also for those in whom I serve. I don't think anyone would admit, saying, I just want to be famous and I don't really care about people, because quite frankly, it's the fans that buy your music and you receive a royalty cut from that, which helps you to continue to do what you do. We get the motto, it's a noble motto, but so many people are in it for themselves, and I see them quickly start and then end, and you never hear about them anymore.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons, Fish, we had you here on the show today is I love what your music represents. I love what it is you're doing through it. And it's a completely unique style. I mean, I know you hear this all the time, that you kind of resemble that Johnny Depp vibe, and it's not the pirate side of you, but it's just, there is a cool indie, cool vibe. You're the kind of guy that people seem to want to hang around. You're just infectious. You have that kind of thing. Tell us about this genre of yours, because quite frankly, I would have never guessed that is your genre.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't, when I start writing music, it's not like, oh, I'm going to try and, be this super alternative indie kind of guy. It's like, I'm just making stuff that I feel like I want to make. And I guess when I wrote this album, it wasn't like trying to make something super different or whatever. It was mostly just me like, okay, I want to write this song, and here's how I'm gonna do it. Here's what I'm gonna use to produce it. And
Right.
it's not really like a thing that I am consciously trying to do. It's just something that I'm doing.
Now, what about the artistic side? Because, musicians come from different walks of life, we know. Some are just prodigies. They're very gifted in being able to either play by ear or score by ear with no formal training, no classical training, never having necessarily played a formal instrument or played an orchestra or band or anything to that degree. What about your training? How did you, what kind of training do you have to actually produce the music that you do?
I mean, I'm standard. I had piano lessons when I was like 5, and playing Old MacDonald, I was like, this is the worst. I don't want to do this.
Right.
And so, basically, got over that. Didn't really think about music for a while until a couple of my buddies, same part of the story, they're like, hey, you want to be in a band? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so that's like kind of what introed me into music, and so I started playing bass, and then they're like, hey, you should play keyboard for this one part of the song. So I was like, okay. So I
Right.
playing keyboard.
And isn't that the beauty of the band? I mean, you just fill in
Yeah.
wherever you're needed.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, that's training that is invaluable
Oh,
because
definitely.
you learn, you force yourself to, a chord is a chord. Granted, each instrument has its different precision and types and sound and range. But it's amazing that you've got an opportunity to kind of make your rounds throughout the band, to have an appreciation for each
definitely.
section and how it all comes together. Tell us about your project, man. What should our viewers be looking for?
I mean, I wrote this album because in August I wrote a track and I was like, oh man, this would sound so good with vocals. I've never sang before, and then
Really?
Wow. I've been in a band like for 7 or 8 years, and they're all great vocalists. And so I was always just the guy who was playing keyboard or bass, and I was like, I'm totally fine without singing.
Right.
And then I wrote this track in August, and I was like, man, this would sound so good with vocals. And so I was like, I should just do it. And so I was like, humming the melody in my head, writing down words and whatever. And then I finally just did it, and I got like some pretty cool response from people. And I was like, hey, I should write more songs. Like, I basically just learned a new instrument, and so I wrote a full album to kind of incorporate that.
I absolutely love that. I mean, quite frankly, that's got to be one of the most intimidating aspects of musicians, is moving from an instrument, being a musician, to being a vocalist,
yeah.
and exposing yourself that way. Because quite frankly, we all cringe when we hear that adult who is singing flat or sharp or just completely out of tune, but we don't seem to feel that way about children, though. We say, oh, they're just a child.
Yeah.
But as an adult, we just build this entire fear around, breaking in front of someone vocally. So that's amazing that you've taken that journey. Tell us a little bit about the album and what kind of ranges of messages and types of music that you present on your album.
That's a big question. Because it ranges like from I guess feel, there's the more upbeat, kind of, I guess indie pop kind of feel, and then it breaks down to something a little simpler with just a synth and drums and vocals.
Wow. Well, I absolutely love that because, quite frankly, one of the songs that I heard, and I'm listening to them all. I haven't even gotten through all of them, probably 2/3 of all your songs, but there's a couple of them, and they really, the one particularly has kind of an African vibe to it. When I hear a little bit of everything from bongos to, drums, and just the timing isn't standard 4/4. It just seems very upbeat, very spontaneous. I think that's infectious, and that's something I think our viewing audience is really going to enjoy from you, because it is not the kind of album that you would see on if we had record stores anymore. I'm sure we do, and I know we do. It's just they're becoming less and less in the marketplace. It's one of the options available out there that I don't think is captured very well by musicians, because it's a mostly emerging segment of a genre, and I love seeing that, man. So hats off to you and to what you're doing. Final note. Really, as you look at all your life and your message, What inspired you to even do this? What is the inspiration for you?
Man, the inspiration for me is basically like we're all gifted with certain things. Like some of us are gifted with communication, or some of us are gifted with like the business aspect of life and numbers or whatever. I was gifted with music, and it wasn't anything that I did. I wasn't like sitting there like trying to jot down stuff and like
Right.
trying to learn super hard so I could be good at it. Like it was just something that I was born with. Like it was given to me.
Sure.
And I really think that like I'm supposed to use that to touch people's lives, and not supposed to like use it for my own glory, but like for the glory of the person that gave it to me.
Well, that's amazing stuff. And I'll tell you this much. You're talking about responsibility now, because so many are living life right now and they have tremendous gifts and talents that they can share to better mankind and to better the lives of someone else. And oftentimes we're looking at, what do we get out of it? Well, quite frankly, we may not get anything out of it. That's just the truth, but do it anyway.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you're doing it anyway. Well, tell us, how can our viewing audience, A, buy your album? How can we look you up on social media? I know you're out there on Facebook and Twitter. Give us your handle, and it'll pop up on the screen, but we want to give our viewing audience an opportunity to be able to connect with you, purchase your songs, and share along with those songs with other people as well, so we can get the word out on you.
Yeah, man. The album is available on iTunes, and it's also available on Spotify and Amazon. And my Facebook is The Painted Pianos. Same with iTunes and Spotify. Twitter is at The Painted Pianos. Yeah.
Well, that's good stuff. Glad to hear it. Well, I've got to tell you what. How are we going to look you up? Is that we looking up Danny McCook, or are we looking up Fish McCook?
I think Facebook. It's honestly it's to people's preferences.
So we just put in Fish, and you ought to pop up on the screen. That's what we expect to see out of you, Van.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, Fish, thank you so much for joining me today here on Straight Talk. You are always welcome back. I want you, as a viewing audience, go out there and support Fish. He's doing a fabulous work, not only with his music, but touching the lives of young adults all around him and giving them a hope and a purpose that goes far beyond them. Thanks again for joining us, Fish.
Thanks, man.
And that's dropping some knowledge from our friend Danny Fish McCook. Get out there and make sure you get an album of his off iTunes and a lot of the other places that he's already mentioned to you. But as I go on here, we start to wrap up the show. I want to talk to you again about this concept of back in the day and bringing forth some of the life lessons that we learned from our upbringing, things like manners and the respect for others. A lot of times we get to a place in today's culture and society that we actually think that we all have to think the same way. And if we don't think the same way, the first thing that gets thrown out there is that you're intolerant, or that you're a bigot, or that you're insensitive. All of these things are not only a lie. I'm not going to call them untrue. I'm going to call it a flat-out lie. Just because you support someone or you respect someone doesn't mean you also endorse their worldview or their value system or their perspective. But it does mean that you have a sense of professionalism about yourself to say, we have to agree to disagree on these things, even where those things are heated in terms of our fundamental values in our faith, our understanding of our worldview, and our perspective on others, and the way the dynamics of people should communicate with each other. So keep that in mind, and if you'll take the first step and think about taking ownership for what you can do and not worrying about what other people are doing, then that would be a good place to start. Well, as I transition to the next place, you might be wanting to get out to see a movie that will change your life about the way you look at the world. Stay tuned for this next trailer for God's Not Dead. The movie's already out, but if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to do so. Here's a word.
You prayed and believed your whole life, and here you are. Explain that to me.
What do you say to people that are offended by your show because you pray to Jesus in every episode?
If we disown him, he'll disown us.
A 12-year-old watches his mother dying of cancer. A God who would allow that is not worth believing in. Life is really a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury and signifying nothing.
Name? Wheaton. Josh Wheaton. Philosophy 150.
You might want to think about a different instructor.
Come on, man, it can't be that bad.
Think Roman Colosseum, people cheering for your death.
I'm Professor Radisson. This is Philosophy 150. I would like to bypass senseless debate altogether and jump to the conclusion, which every sophomore is already aware of: there is no God. All that I require from each of you is that you fill in the papers I've just given you with 3 little words: God is dead. Mr. Wheaton, is something wrong?
I can't do what you want. I'm a Christian.
If you cannot bring yourself to admit that God is dead, then you will need to defend the antithesis.
Think of Jesus as my friend.
You think Jesus is God?
I don't want to disappoint him.
So your acceptance of this challenge may be the only meaningful exposure to God and Jesus they'll ever have.
See, to me, he's not dead. I don't want anyone to get talked out of believing in him just because his professor thinks they should.
Mr. Wheaton, are you ready?
We're going to put God on trial.
If you think you're smarter than me, Wheaton, do not try to humiliate me in front of my students. In that classroom, there is a God. I'm him.
This experiment is over. You get to decide who the most important person in your life is. Me, Professor Radisson.
But I have to do this thing. Like it's something that God wants me to do. I can't just turn away from it.
You just want to ensnare them in your primitive superstition.
What I want is for them to make their own choice. That's what God wants.
You have no idea how much I'm going to enjoy failing you.
Yeah, but who are you really looking to fail? Me or God?
God's not dead, he's surely alive. He's living on the inside, roaring like a lion. God's not dead, he's surely alive. He's living on the inside, roaring like a lion.
Science supports his existence. You know the truth. So why do you hate him? It's a very simple question. Why do you hate God?
God's not dead, he's surely alive. He's living on the inside, roaring like a lion.
Up next, I want to talk to you about the questions that matter most to you. You know, oftentimes I ask you to hashtag Egypt Speaks or hashtag Straight Talk and send me your questions through all of our social media portals. I want to hear from you about the things that are stressing you, or maybe you have questions about that I may be able to respond to. So this is the segment we call Word on the Street. I want to talk to you about a couple questions that have come into us thus far. And our first question as we begin to roll comes from Brooklyn in McKinney, Texas. She says, I'm a 21-year-old single female that grew up without my father. He just came back into my life 4 years ago, but we always argue because I call him by his first name, Doug. What's the big deal? Brooklyn, that's a real good question. The first is this, that there is a learning principle in life based upon you honoring your mother and your father. Now, honoring them doesn't mean that you agree with everything they do, you don't agree with their methods, you don't support everything that they have inflicted upon you or tried to teach you. But that has nothing to do with you being able to honor them. You see, honoring comes solely from you. Your ability to respect your father and calling him by his first name is not a respect in any way, shape, or form. I think you actually already know that. It shouldn't come as a surprise to you. It would be no different than you calling your grandmother by her first name or your grandfather by his first name. I always say, and it's not just what I say, but the learning principle is this: rules without relationships always lead to rebellion. That's a mathematical equation and a guaranteed certainty that if you have rules without a relationship, there will always be rebellion involved as a final result. So what I want to do is ask you to do something that's very difficult for you to do. You may not call him Doug, you may not call him Dad, but you better get a title that is appropriate for him, that he is respecting of and comfortable with, so that you can acknowledge him in a right way, and then maybe that'll help to grease the skids, per se, and help you to have a better relationship with your father as he hopefully tries to build a relationship with you. Next question comes into us from Jason and Declan in Jacksonville, North Carolina. He says, Jason says, I'm black and my wife is white. We are both 23 years old. Both sides of our families don't like each other, mostly because of race. We're going to have our first child in a few months and don't know how to handle the family drama. Help. I'm so sorry to hear that you and Declan are dealing with that, Jason. I tell you what, yours is not unique to just you, but I suspect there are lots of in our viewing audience that have been dealing with very similar like situations, be it culture, creed, ethnicity, language, location, intellect, economy, scales of economy, and all those different types of things. But as it relates to you, because you have a primary responsibility to your wife to protect, provide for your wife, and establish a boundary of health around them, this is key. Ensure that you ensure the sanctity of that first by keeping those poisonous and toxic folks, even within your immediate family, out of your inner circle with your wife and your soon-to-be born child. Now, what's interesting about that is that you're responsible for managing your family, and your wife should be managing her family. What I mean in terms of managing is managing their expectations. Only you know your family and the dynamics and have the freedom to really hear the garbage that's going to come out of their mouth, and vice versa with your wife. But if a child is going to be brought into the world, it's going to be their major loss. Believe me, people tend to change when a little baby is involved. And there's nothing like a grandparent or aunts and uncles or future cousins to be able to dote over your child. But again, your responsibility is establishing a border of safety and health around your family. Take care of them and pray about it. And I just have the greatest sense of confidence that you'll start to see results over a period of time. It may not be the magic pill that changes everything overnight, but if you'll apply yourself, I believe help is on the way. Now, as I start to wrap up here, one of the things that makes this show so real is that we get an opportunity to get into schools and universities and churches and conferences and retreats and all kinds of places to be able to communicate a hope that matters. As a show here, Straight Talk was really built upon the premise of my book, Life, The Struggle Within. Why don't you get a copy of that? You can connect with us on social media, facebook.com/Egypt Speaks. We're also out there on Twitter at /Egypt McKee. And then, of course, out there on YouTube as well, /Egypt Speaks. I want to be able to connect with you. Why? Because you matter. You know, everyone is searching around for that one thing that matters most. And we want to be able to have a relationship that actually leverages true hope and allows people to be able to speak freely and not be chastised for it. So, if you'll stay in touch with us, keep watching the show, keep tuning in, and share with your friends. Have them tune in and just listen to some of the things that I want to share from you from a perspective from my heart. I tell you, Straight Talk is just trying to change one life at a time. I always say, listen, I don't build buildings, but I do build up people. I hope some of that people is you. Stay tuned with us. Come back again. We'll see you next time on Straight Talk.